In the previous two videos we talked about linear equations and quadratic equations. This video is just a discussion on solving different types of equations. So I'm going to start with an absolute value equation. If you have an absolute value equation, the first thing you want to do is isolate the absolute value. So pretend like that whole part that has the absolute value on it, pretend like that is your variable and go through the steps of getting that by itself. So the first thing I'm going to do here is subtract 1 from both sides. So I would have 3 times the absolute value of x minus 2 is equal to 12. Do not distribute the 3. Absolute value symbols do not work the same way as parentheses, so don't distribute the 3. Instead, divide by 3 to get rid of that. So we would have the absolute value of x minus 2 is equal to 4. Once you have isolated the absolute value, at that point, if you really think about what absolute value is saying, it is saying that this expression on the inside needs to either be 4 or that expression on the inside needs to be negative 4 so that when we take the absolute value of that, we get 4. Okay, so once you have the absolute value isolated, take the expression on the inside and set that equal to positive and negative, whatever's on this right side, and then we can solve. So if I add 2, I'm going to get x equals 6. Or if I add 2 here, I'm going to get x equals negative 2. Quick discussion, if this value was negative, so if I isolate the absolute value and what's on the right side is negative, then the answer would be no solution because I can't take the absolute value of anything and get a negative number on this side. So that has to be positive for me to even work this out. So make sure that that happens. I get two answers there. Okay, radical equations. Radical equation just simply means that there is a square root involved. These range from really easy to solve to more difficult. I've given you an example here that's more difficult. But again, you can have some that are really easy. Just like isolating the absolute value, the first thing you want to do is isolate the square root. So I'm going to actually subtract 1 over here to this side. So I have 2x minus 1 is equal to negative the square root of 2 minus x. Then I'm going to divide by negative 1 so that I get rid of that. So that's going to give us negative 2x plus 1 is equal to the square root of 2 minus x. Now if you don't like to have your leading term being negative here, you can flip these around, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to make this 1 minus 2x is equal to the square root of 2 minus x. So I've isolated the square root. Sometimes it's already done for you. Sometimes it takes a little bit of work to get that done. Once you have isolated the square root, I'm going to square both sides. What that's going to do on this side is cancel those out. I know that the right side of my equation is going to be 2 minus x. The left side of the equation, 1 minus 2x squared, means I have 1 minus 2x times itself, right? That's what that means. So I need to know that, and I need to FOIL this out. So 1 times 1 is 1, 1 times negative 2x, negative 2x times 1, and negative 2x times negative 2x would be plus 4x squared. Okay, well now I have a quadratic. So a lot of times when you're solving a radical equation, you're going to end up solving a quadratic equation. So I'm going to move everything to this side so that I have my my quadratic equal to 0, which is what I like. So I've got positive 4x squared. I have minus 2x, which is negative 4x, but I'm also going to add this x over. So that means I'm going to have minus 3x. Right? So we've got minus 4x and then plus 1x is going to give us minus 3x there. And then I'm also going to subtract this 2. So 1 minus 2 is going to give me minus 1 there, equals 0. Okay, at that point in time, 4x squared minus 3x minus 1 You can factor this. You can use the quadratic formula here. It does factor. And that factor, let's see, I'm going to do 4x and 4x. This is covered in a factoring video. If you're not sure how to factor that, reference that. 4 times negative 1 is negative 4. Add to negative 3 is going to be negative 4 and positive 1. And then I'm going to reduce this down to x minus 1. So I've got x minus 1 and 4x plus 1. And now, if I set those each equal to 0, I get x equals 1 and x equals negative 1/4. Now, you do want to check to make sure that those both work with a radical equation. So, rule of thumb there is anytime that you solve a quadratic equation when the original equation was not a quadratic equation, right? I started with a radical equation. I ended up solving a quadratic equation. If you do that, you want to check your answers. Normally, it will check out if it's if you plug it in to both sides and you have positives going on. So if I plug in 1, I'm going to have 2 on the left side, and on the right side, 2 minus 1 would be 1. Square root of that is 1, and 1 minus that is 0. So that actually does not work. Okay. And then if I plug in negative 1/4, on the left side I would have negative 1/2. And on the right side of the equation, 2 plus 1/4. So inside there I'd have 2 plus 1/4, which is actually 9/4. So that when I take the square root of that, I get 3/2. And if I do 1 minus 3/2, that's 1 minus 1.5. That's going to give me negative 1/2. So negative 1/4 does check out. 1 did not check out. So I actually only have one solution. It's negative 1/4. That example is probably about the most difficult type of radical equation that I could give you. They don't get much more challenging than that. A lot of them are easier than that. Okay, rational equations. So with a rational equation, you can look at this as in a couple different ways as well. From my experience, the way that makes the most sense to people is you want to make everything have a common denominator, and then if everything has a common denominator, you can essentially ignore the denominators and just look at the numerators. So right now, my denominators are x, x plus 2, and 1. So what I'm going to think is I want to make all of my denominators x times x plus 2. Right? That's going to be a common denominator across the board here. So if I want to get a common denominator of x times x plus 2, this first one I have to multiply by x plus 2 on top and bottom. So I'm going to have 3 times x plus 2 over x times x plus 2. This middle one, I've got the x plus 2, I need the x. So that's going to be 5x times x plus 2. And on the right side, I need both the x and the x plus 2. So this is going to be 2 times x plus 2 over x times x plus 2. Now, what happens here, now that I've gotten everything to have a common denominator, what I can do is I can just simply ignore my denominator because they're all the same. So I'm going to get rid of all that. Then I'm just looking at the numerators. 3 times x plus 2, that's 3x plus 6 plus 5x is equal to, I'm going to distribute my 2x here, 2x squared plus 4x. Okay, so make the denominators the same and then ignore the denominators and just focus on the numerator. I have a quadratic equation, so I'm going to move everything to the right side because I want my x squared term to be positive. So 3x and 5x, that's 8x, but I'm going to move that over here. So I'm going to subtract 8x. That's going to get rid of both of those things. I'm also going to subtract 6. So I'm going to have 2x squared minus 4x minus 6 equals 0. If you factor out a 2, I can then have a leading term of 1, which will be good. And then I can continue to factor this down, which would be x minus 3 and x plus 1. And then I can set each thing equal to 0. Now, setting the constant equal to 0, that doesn't really make sense. So if this is just a constant out here, you don't need to worry about that. I'm going to set x minus 3 equal to 0, which is going to give me x equals 3. I'm going to set x plus 1 equal to 0, which is going to give me x equals negative 1. So I have both of those solutions, 3 and negative 1. Okay, last one is a fourth degree quadratic type. So we've got a fourth degree polynomial here, but it's of a quadratic type, which means it factors. All you have to do is put an x squared with your two x terms here. So x squared and x squared. What multiplies to negative 8 and adds to 2 would be minus 4 and plus 2. You could, at that point in time, set them equal to 0. So I would get x squared minus 4 equals 0. So x squared equals 4, and x squared equals negative 2. And then here, if you square root, I'm going to get x equals positive and negative 2. And here, if I square root, we'll get into this much later, but you can't take the square root of a negative, so you should have learned in Algebra 2 that you would call that plus and minus I square root of 2, and you get some imaginary solutions there. The main point I want you to know is that if it is a quadratic type, which means it's a trinomial, and it goes fourth, second, and then your constant, then you can factor it just like you factor a quadratic trinomial, and then set those things equal to 0.